this is probably one of my favorite conferences to both attend and present at for a variety of reasons, but because of people like Alyssa, John, and I'm going to touch that a little bit. Why? Because yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, but it's been a fun ride. But that's it. I kind of made this decision that I'm going to leave cybersecurity, and I'll kind of get into what that means. But yeah, it's kind of an odd topic. And I was just talking to Danny and Khaki about it. You know, it's like this, find ourselves as we do this more and older, we start talking about more of the personal reflections. And I don't know if that's just age or wisdom, but hopefully not jadedness. And I guess that's the overarching theme. A lot of this is I'm not leaving because I'm angry or jaded. It's just after 30 years of doing this and seeing so much happen in my professional growth and my personal growth, there's just a change. And cybersecurity is always going to be a huge passion for me, but I really want to hang up my spurs as a profession and work on the next chapter of my life. And I'll get into that a little bit too. I don't even know what that means yet. But, you know, as I started thinking about this talk, I've done a lot to mentor people coming in. I've mentored and brought in tons of people. I've had hundreds of people work for me, and I've tried to encourage them. But as I get older and start talking to other people in the industry and that have done senior executive stuff like I've done, it's like, what's your exit strategy? And that's something that I realize a lot of people in this industry don't talk about. We talk about how, yeah, we definitely need more hiring and different things along that, but we never speak about the end and what that's going to look like. And I've been more self-reflective on that. I'll touch a little bit about why, but, you know, as we certainly see more people kind of burning out and getting less out of their day-to-day, I don't want to die at my desk doing the same thing over and over again. I really want to enjoy this as long as I can, and take some of these skills I've learned being a hacker, being everything in IT, and put it to other areas of business and life. So it's not a flippant or easy decision, and I'll cover that. But look, I'm nearly 50 years old, and I'm taking some time to kind of reassess, plan for the future, and ask, you know, certainly, who am I? And you hear this kind of litany of things like what I've done, but does that really define me? And, you know, not necessarily this guy. And yeah, there's been all these things, but is it me? It'll really have started in the 80s and 90s, and then professionally in the 90s and 2000s. I've been able to do a lot of cool things. I've gotten to travel around the world, go to London this summer, been to China twice, work with controversial companies, be quoted in the New York Times about that at times, which are always interesting. And again, mentored a lot of people and tried to raise a lot of awareness about the human factor of what we do. And I think the strongest part of what I can offer to the industry has been my soft skills, my ability to manage, mentor people, my social engineering. I've never been the best hands-on keyboard hacker. I'm actually pissed off a lot of my red teamers at times. Like, it's not fair that you could just walk into a building and sit down in front of a computer. I'm like, we're not playing fair at times. You know, if my physical penetration and social engineering skills gets me to objectives, and that's a win for us. And so I've been really fortunate, I think, to be able to build, break, repair businesses. But I kind of almost hate that question at times, like, what do you do? It, again, makes me think more and more lately of what defines me. And, you know, one of the jokes that came out with what I really do at Splunk is work with CISOs to do this kind of understanding their strategic goals, operationalize it. How do we do that as part of this whole strategy? And a lot of what Alyssa said, if you caught that in the keynote this morning, is a lot of what I do is translating these complicated technical things into ways that the executives can understand it. So I think kind of fortunate that I can ride that line. But it's not necessarily who I think defines me. And I've done things, and I don't know if anybody heard of a special master until recently. You know, when that cup came up on the news, I was like, oh God, I do that too. And people were like, wait, you do that? It was like when people learned I did cybersecurity, like, oh my God, you do that? I thought it was IT. And then as these things become more these professional things, I still think it's odd. Like, it's not who I am. And I really have been trying to think about what is going to be at the end, because this doesn't even look like me anymore. You know, this headshot was something from a corporate shot a couple of years ago. And more it's thinking, you know, we're all going to die someday. on a long enough timeline, the survival rate drops to zero if you read Fight Club or saw it in the movie. And it's like, what do I want to be remembered for? And is it all those things on the title slide, my resume or my LinkedIn profile? Is that what I want to be remembered for? But I think I can offer more. And then I started thinking back, okay, well, how it all started and really how I've changed in the past 45 years. I mean, it really started in 1981, 82 with computers. And, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a hacker. It's that kind of Godfather, but the Goodfellas lines, was this something that I saw other people doing, and that's something I wanted to be part of. And so in 81, 82, I was about 5 years old. My parents brought home a Texas Instrument TI 99 4A. Has anybody actually used one of those? Yes, I'm not the only one in the room. But it started to feel kind of old after a while. I was actually at a customer site the other day, and they were like, hey, do you remember mouse trails? I was like, yeah. And like all the other young analysts in the SOC were like, what are mouse trails? I was like, in Windows 3, what was your first Windows? And they're like, XP. And I was like, fuck. And you really start feeling old. Like, it's like when people don't even know like Windows technology, like, come on, Novell NetWare, anybody? No. And it's like, no, people don't remember that. And, this computer, even at that time, it's funny to see it had 3 megahertz CPU, 16K of RAM, 16 colors. And I played Hunt the Wumpus on that. That was great. And at some point I came across Compute Magazine, which had a big kind of index at the back of instructional pages of basic code. So it was just a spaghetti code. You would just sit there and read and type in, and it would, go to all the go-to commands and then fail 90% of the time, and you'd have to debug your own code manually. And there's absolute joy, some sarcasm in there. And at the end of the day, you get this little blue box that would just bounce from one screen to the other. And I was like, 6 hours for that. That was it. But it was cool. People still didn't understand what I was doing. But in the 80s, computers became more of a part of our business and home communities. And I started seeing movies like Tron and War Games. I was just kind of blown away with these kind of anti-heroes, these little kind of punk hackers that were out in the whatever verse that we would now call, I guess, the internet, but doing these types of things online to be these misfits and smarter than everybody and social engineer people into things. But they can command computers to do powerful things. That was always such an attraction to me. And I wanted to do that. So my parents continued to bring technology into the home, and they were leading communication consultants in the world, and they constantly had new technology come around, and they made some big investments in a compact portable plus computer, which was about 30 pounds. And this thing it was just a suitcase, fucking metal, and you would take off the keyboard and there was a small monochrome monitor, and that was portable. I mean, that's what you really going to want. Like, if you go look at the old advertisements, are like people are carrying around like they're going to go on a plane with this thing. But it was kind of cool to have this computer that can quote unquote be portable. And at that time, I started doing more stuff with like WordPerfect because it can autocorrect. And for me, I suck at spelling. And once I found something that could just do the work for me, I was like, great. So I actually had this whole thing where I wrote an entire paper on birds for second grade in the computer. And then I think I did some ASCII art in it. And we all got called down to the schools officials, like Mr. and Mrs. Brush, we have a concern that you did all this work for him. I mean, clearly he used the computer, and they're like, yeah, it says red, cardinals are red. Like, trust me, I think we would have done a little bit more than that. But it was kind of odd, we're the authorities, but the administrators at the time were like, how could a kid use a computer? Where now it's, with my 12-year-old daughter, that's all she's ever known is technology and been on things. And she has her own laptop for school in middle school. So it's interesting to see how this has all changed. And again, it just keeps making me more reflective on where I've come and where I've been. And, things were really starting to trend to become more mainstream in the 90s. And it was funny seeing Alyssa talk about Prodigy this morning. I mean, that was my first I can't remember if it was CompuServe or Prodigy, which I was on first, but both of them I bounced around on quite a bit. Was on multi-user dungeons and the bulletin boards of that. And we were able to do things like email you can only do with internal at the time. But that was kind of cool until you travel. And my dad had this little early kind of laptop computer. It just did 4 lines of stuff. But I was able to dial into CompuServe. from Wisconsin to New York City. And I didn't understand that there was toll charges at that time. So we had to negotiate some of that out of allowance. But yeah, at the time, and again, I tell my daughter this, like, we had to dial long distance numbers. She's like, oh, it's just a name, right? I'm like, no, you had to memorize these things. And there was a lot more to that. So yeah, these landline phones were there, and it was different. And if you didn't use a local number, yeah, you got banged pretty hard. So throughout the late 80s and early 90s, I kind of became that kid that was the go-to for the family and friends in the neighborhood of go fix computers. And I've edited more auto exec bat files and config sys files than I ever want to, just to get Sound Blaster drivers to run. I still have nightmares and traumas about that I'm working through with my therapist, but it was just a pain in the ass. And there was a lot of that hacker mentality, that early stages of banging your head against the wall until you figure out what works. Because half the time it didn't, and you had to come around with workarounds, and there weren't a lot of resources. You couldn't go Google it. You had to find a manual that had it, and the manual half the time was poorly documented. If you still read MSDN articles, you'll understand things haven't changed in 40 years. And, eventually at some point we move away from more of these, early Intel processor computers that get better and starting to do more work with this thing called the internet. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's kind of ubiquitous at this time, but as that became something, it opened up a whole new world to me. I was talking to people all over the world. I was seeing things. I started getting more into the hacker culture and hearing about people like Mitnick and Paulson and all these things that were going on, and pulling down stuff from bulletin boards, from old 2600 magazines, Frack and Freak, and really just getting into this culture of hacking and just being amazed by what all these other people like me were out there, and people I didn't know, but the mindset of curiosity of tearing these things apart. And be able to go to these USNet forums and read about these things. So after high school, I was kind of stuck with that. What do you do? You're really good at computers, you like computers. And I lived in IBM country up in Hudson Valley, New York, where it was, Biden was just there talking about, bringing mainframe or semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States. It's still a big thing there. It's like, mainframes, Doug, go learn I was like, why would I do that? And like, well, we're an IBM country. I'm like, 80% of the computers are personal computers. What's helping with that? And as I was talking to more and more people in the business community, they said, yeah, we can really use help with that. And I started a business doing computer house calls, and it was break fix, and it was going around repairing computers. And that business grew and built, and it eventually kind of went to one thing to the other, where I was then able to get deeper into computers and networking, get certifications on Windows. And all of a sudden I find myself in the early 2000s supporting big companies like Merrill Lynch on the road all the time, building out their networks at a travel thing. And as they disappeared, I was able to really literally disappear overnight when Merrill Lynch got absorbed by Bank of America, have one of those moments of what I'm going to do. And luckily enough, I got involved in computer forensics. Somebody asked me to testify in a case, and I was able to rip apart a computer, get back to that hacker roots again of, oh, this is so cool. I'm pulling things down to the BIOS level and understanding what works, testifying on it. And it was really cool. But there was always little movies like Sneakers that came out that I saw. I was like, that's really what I wanted to do. I want to be that handsome motherfucker, Robert Redford, that's running a pen test team. And I think we all do it. But that was like, it was so cool to me. And that was what I strived to be. But, I had imposter syndrome. I'm an IT guy. I'm not a hacker. I wasn't in the news. I didn't get arrested. So what could I know? There was like some litmus challenge for me of like, how can you do this? But, then I was chasing hackers. Then I was testifying on hacking. Then I was running pen test teams in the 2000s and building one group after another, and was able to really kind of find myself very fortunate enough to spend, from early 2000s until mid 2000s, until like 4 or 5 years ago, right before the pandemic, kind of like, wow, now I've really kind of done it all, from pen testing, 500 to 600 hands-on incident response investigations, testified in court, testified as a special, and I'm like all these things. And I said, I shouldn't be here still. There's a lot of that imposter syndrome was questioning. So I started a podcast, and for two reasons. I want to get back to the community. And one of my early mentors said, you got to give to get. You want to be part of this community, you got to contribute. That's how you're going to grow. And so I speak a lot now. I do the podcast, although it's been a bit of a hiatus for a while as I kind of look at here. And actually, a lot of the speakers that are speaking today have been on the podcast. I was fortunate enough to have guys like John and Alyssa on, and I mean, I can just go through the list. There's so many people, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to meet these folks, talk to them, and then find myself at this kind of odd peer level. Like to sit there last night at the speaker dinner, just BSing with John was something I never thought in 2010 would ever happen. But I am sitting with my heroes, talking to them, and having a casual conversation about things has been kind of really cool. And it helped me really kind of work on that imposter syndrome to realize, okay, now that that's noise in the back of my head's dialed down, I am part of this community. I am a hacker. I have been able to really kind of come out and feel comfortable with who I am for the first time and really start looking at my achievements. Now, it hasn't always been great. There's been a few people that I've reached out to, and there's always that thing of like never meet your heroes. And for those who can't see it, we're glad you want to speak to, I spoke to Perry Carpenter, who was at Know before, and good for him on the multi-billion dollars he just got. And he told me to talk to a gentleman by the name Kevin, if you can read between the lines of which Kevin that is, that only wants to take interviews with people with 10 million or more eyeballs in their public speaking engagements. And to good luck, as I'm somebody new on the scene. And I was like, go fuck yourself. But, and it's rare that I would call out anybody by name, but it was like, some of these edge into me a little bit over time where I'm like, the attitude and some of the things are starting to change in our culture that I'm like, okay, I'm not in love with this response. And for the most part, this is the only one that ever came out like this. John, yeah, sure, when? Alyssa, yep, I'm available next week. Leslie Carhart, I had to chase down around the world for like a year, but she kept in touch and saying, I will definitely do it. So for the most people, this has been great. So it's been really great for me. So then I kind of find myself at this intersection again. And it's like, so why now? I've kind of been on the top of my game now, and I've been able to, as Alyssa said, be a hacker in a boardroom. Wear a mohawk in a boardroom talk hacking with executives. That's, you name a pretty big company, I've probably done it, and it's been great. So don't get me wrong on all this. It's been great. It is great. Last week I was on the road and getting to travel, see friends and lots of folks in cyber and the IR teams in the cyber industry. Last week, people I've really gotten to know as close friends. Here this week with this family. Next week, hosting a CISO panel in Florida, and then going to a CISO dinner next. So it's like the stuff I get to do is pretty great in that sense. So it's by far means I don't complain, but I don't know how much greater it's going to get. At a certain point, I'm starting to think like, this is pretty good. I don't know if I can achieve anything more or that I want to. And there's been some other things that I'll get into that have really kind of made me reflect on that. And I got to get this worry, living in Colorado, lots of mountaineering, lots of folks that conquer all these hills. And we just recently lost somebody in the mountaineer. Not that I'm a mountaineer, but you just kind of get by proxy to it. But somebody who was a mountaineer in Colorado, and she died on skiing down a slope in the Himalayas. But she was also like one of the first people to do two of the biggest peaks back to back. And I'm like, there's almost a certain point of, if you keep going after these peaks and these new achievements, you're going to die on that mountain. Like at what point? And it's really started making me like, I don't want to die in that mountain. I want to leave it healthy and live a longer life and not become so attached to this. As much as I love it, there's so much more out there. So I want to go out on a high note. And there's many other things I love doing and want to accomplish. And really in the last couple of years, and I've talked about this at this conference, is some of the mental health stuff. Is from 2006 and 2017 were particularly hard years for me. It really made me reevaluate things. I was the business practice I had built inside a company doing pen testing, governance, incident response, just got shut down. I found myself really kind of lost. Moved out to Colorado, and I had no friends. My wife and I were on the rocks at the time, and now I have no job doing things I love. We just got in a really bad car accident where somebody ran a red light on our cell phone and hit my side of the car and ended up with 2 herniated discs. So I'm in physical, emotional pain, kind of the spiritual pain of like, who am I? And there were some dark moments there, and I've talked about that. And I've been able to recover from that. But even in the last year, I've gone through a pretty, and for anybody who's gone through a divorce, there's never a good divorce. I mean, people's like, oh, how'd the divorce go? It sucks. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For anybody who's been there, it takes this emotional toll on you, your kids, your family. I lost my mother in February. Shortly thereafter, one of the last talks I gave, I think it was in Reno, was on while it was Hackin Fest, was on diversity. And the reason I'm such a big advocate for diversity, because in those 90s and 80s, some of the folks that really helped me along the way that were close extended family of mine were not white guys that looked like me. They were Guyanese Indians from the Caribbean that were part of my extended family. And so Gavin Singh, who was working at IBM at the time, brought me in, taught me a lot about networking protocols, taught me a lot about, early Windows 3.1 networking. He's 12 years older than me, considered him a brother. His mother died in May, and shortly thereafter, he died of a heart attack in June. So those 3 back to back, then finalizing a divorce, it put a lot it hasn't put into perspective yet, and that's what I'll kind of talk about, it's really made me realize I need to slow down and really slow down. To continue going at this pace of professional accolades and achievements, I don't know why I'm doing it at a certain point. I've had some of these things, and if it's going to continue just to do it for the sake of doing it, I don't know if that's a good reason. And I'd say, look, if there's a lot of people that are starting their career and you have options, you have much more options, because I kind of hate that when people say, well, Doug, you can get a job anywhere. Yeah, I can, but it's also, I can't make those decisions as lightly as I could 10 years ago. I have limited options in that, in the way that things are, usually can take me 6-8 months to get a job because of the process and how selective I have to be. And I just can't make these jumps easily. So I want to really kind of reevaluate the industry and myself, because I've grown. I've seen some lack of growth in the industry, but I've seen a lot of good things. And so I've seen some problems. And I want to leave before I get too cynical and jaded, and quite frankly, starting to hate certain things about cyber. There's just certain things that are left there that I think are somebody else's problems to solve. Not that I'm abdicating, it's just I've done a lot, and I don't feel this need to have to continue before I'm unhappy. So there's a couple of things that I'm hoping as an industry we can work on, and I'm willing to work on, at least set the ship in the right direction before I leave. And don't take this as me shitting on the industry for the sake of it. I've just been doing this long enough that there's certain things that I've noticed that can really kind of be bothering us, and it needs to be called out. And I hope before I exit, I can correct some of these challenges, or at least get, like I said, get people on the right track. But there's a few things I would love to see as change, because I think it would help others in my role, or as they get to where I get in more senior parts of this industry, not get so burnt out and jaded. And for me personally, as this kind of hacker and DIY punk, I generally ask for forgiveness instead of permission. But I'm often being brought into organizations to be an agent of change. And after a while, I'm told to slow down and not to be so much a disruptor. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, kind of get me at one speed, and that's full bore. But if you want change, it's something I'm going to drive at as hard as I can. So I'm not really sorry about that. And I know there's a lot of people out me like that. They get frustrated with that. And that organizations need to really be more honest with what they want when they say they want change and progress, because they're not always the same things. And I've been able to, kind of crush a lot of my goals at every organization, and met with at many of them with a bit of confusion of like, ooh, you actually did everything you said you were going to do. I'm like, is that a problem? Like, I didn't know that was a bad thing. It's like, well, others might not feel comfortable, or that, they're not being able to keep up. I'm like, well, how is this my problem? And I found there's a lot within the industry at times that folks don't really want to change their advertising. And to me, that's getting to be a little bit frustrating. And at the end of the day, I also want to do problems to solve. That was one thing I think I've been really thinking about lately, is how many of the same things I've been seeing for a long time. I said B1 vulnerabilities, Jesus. I mean, I really like, am I still doing instant response on those? But yeah. And I just want, for more people to look at this as ways of saying, okay, we've been dealing with a lot of the same problems. Why? And for me, a lot of it is we focus a lot on the symptoms and not the cures. I would love for people to take more of an honest approach and say, well, look, I'd rather work myself out of a job. I'd rather have things off my to-do list that we're not just doing the same RDP and SMBV vulnerabilities over and over again. But I'm feeling like, and it's not just the vendors, it's a lot of people, are again, just getting in this cycle of really wanting to treat the symptoms and not the cure, because it becomes kind of easy at times. But I don't want to be in that position anymore of doing that. That's one of the big problems that I'm finding for me personally is I can't solve the same problems. I want new problems. And I think this is going to require more than technical skills. It's also going to require the folks on the technical side to have more business skills that are, quite frankly, not necessarily, second or third to technical skills, but sometimes in the front. And I think that's what Alyssa was trying to hit on a little bit this morning is we need to evolve and adapt and get to the point where we're more serious about the business side of what we do, communicate better, and not have such an attitude all the time about the lack of technical acumen somebody can have, which kind of brings you up to my next frustration. Oh, we're going to just do something real quick. I just realized I copied over a slide. Sorry about that. And it's a little bit of that hacker tech bro attitude. It's like enough already. Like we've been there for a long time with that. And I'm kind of getting sick and tired of some of the elitism, and I think others are too, that are quite frankly coming from a lot of people that look like me and that have probably been in this industry as long as me. We really need to start getting over ourselves. And the amount of drama lately you see online, I just got off of Twitter lately. I just can't. It's not good for business. It's not good for our community. We're not driving the right messages forward when we're getting into the weeds and some of the dumbest things. And there's things that are worth fighting about, but there's a lot that I see that are not. And there's just been a lot of things where I see that negativity creeping in, and it starts eating after you after a while. It's hard to put that down. And sometimes I've also even experienced this recently where I'm magic what batteries do. But I feel like, and I've had this happen recently a couple times where I've been very emphatic about talking about the business side of the business, how people need to be more engaged with executives. And somebody on a very high level technical side sat me down and goes, look, Doug, they, being other people within this area, they would respect you more if you were more technical. And I was like, the fuck you just said? I was like, what makes you think I'm not? Just because I'm not flexing on that all the time? Because that's not what I'm trying to dunk on with it. Like, I've been there, done that. Do you really want me to reverse engineer an MFT table? I've done that. That's not what gets me going anymore. And I don't feel like I have to prove myself in that. And so some of that attitude that I even get within peer groups, I'm not cool with that. And I think that's a problem. I know I'm not the only one because I don't think I have to, particularly because I've been able to get to that level of getting into the boardroom, working with CISOs and executives. I got root. I got in. I got as high as you want in the organization. Like, what more do you want from me? And to sit there, okay, well, we don't see your technical skills enough. I don't know. That's not the right attitude I want, because it's not the things anymore that get me excited about this. And that's the thing. There's other areas of this that get me excited, but they're quite frankly getting less and less. And it's, again, not to crap on it. But I don't feel like I need to kind of earn everybody's respect. I felt like I've been really, accomplishing what I can do. But then there's some other areas. Like this email I literally just got. I don't even know I know what all these words mean together. I have no clue. I mean, what the hell is contains ransom and malware and stops east-west traffic to the blast? So this is a sales email I get all fucking day, because I've had CISO on my title and people feel like this is the thing that they're going to send me all day. So one of the things I did at Splunk was I started doing like basically sales training for the salespeople to say, think like a hacker, do your recon, talk to people like humans, like social engineer this. Don't send me stop sending this stuff. And it's so bad within the vendor space to be doing this. And it's like the sales and marketing people are not listening. They're, it's not about the latest sales campaign to get as much people to click on your emails. It's actually pissing off more and more executives that are getting these. You're making the situation worse. And so the cold calls and emails, the cold calls I get is 7 a.m. my time. I have a 917 phone number before I lived in New York. So that goes into a CRM system mapped to New York. I live in Colorado, 2 hours behind New York. So when they want to get that CISO first thing in the morning, they're calling me at 7 a.m. I don't want a phone call from a salesperson at 7 a.m. And they're like, oh, I thought you were in East Coast time. I'm like, no, delete this number. But that happens 3 or 4 times a week. It's getting old. We can do better. And we need to be able to call that out with inside our own business and industry that this is a problem. And again, I love this conference because it's a community conference. And yes, there's more of the tech side of this. I could be fortunate enough to let John allow me to basically just go talk about the personal stuff. I'm cool with that. But the amount of times talks like this, I've been turned down at RSAC, Black Hat for years, even SANS conferences where I'm pretty well tight with them, which is how I kind of ended up with this crew here. But I've just been wanting to do more than just the echo chamber bullshit talks. And it's really hard for us to get our word out there, even with our own community, if you're not just following the script. And so at what point I'm like, well, when did we get away from that? I thought that was the whole point of this. If I go back to old 2600 magazine articles, they were all over the place. Some of them suck, but it was interesting to allow an open forum. I find that lens getting closer and closer, or closed more. And I'm just sorry that, I'm not sorry, I want to talk about other things than that I see impacting the community. And it was funny. It was actually, sometimes it happens within my own companies. Splunk wanted me to give this vendor talk, and it was so vendor talk on ransomware. And I'm like, I'm not giving these slides. And they're like, you have to. This one's Gartner approved. I was like, oh, okay, whoops, I gave the wrong ones. I gave mine instead. And for 50 minutes, I talked about ransomware impact, MITRE attacking, and shockingly enough, technical stuff that nobody saw at my company, but I digress. But I went really in the depth of it. And somebody afterwards goes, well, hold on a second. I thought you were Splunk. I'm like, yeah, because you didn't mention Splunk once. I was like, correct. Well, how do you do it at Splunk? I was like, see, now I got in your head. You're thinking about the brand. I didn't have to say it. Now you just said it for me. But this idea that we had to plug the brand the whole time doesn't work. And so it's trying to get others to really kind of look at these things from conferences and presentations. What, John? Oh, the cursing? I'm fucking sorry, okay? I'll never fucking do it again. But, I really question the return on investment of this conference, because then I started looking around like, how much do we spend on RSAC and Black Hat every year? So I read the Verizon data breach report. Has that significantly changed in 10 years? We still see a lot of the same things happening. And I sit there and go, for spending all this money on conferences, why are some of these numbers not changing year after year after year after year? And it gets to be a bit old. I'm tired of that kind of rat race of, well, this is the way we do it. This is where you have to go to be seen. I'm like, to me, it's not progress. And that's what I drive for. So it really drives me nuts to say that, okay, well, it's good. All these companies wasted all this money on swag. I came up with an idea with a company a couple of years ago. I was like, why don't we sort of swag? We just do $5 donations to one of these 3 charities for somebody. Put a charity donation out in their name. What are they walking away with? I was like, a better feel. Like, they'll remember that. Trust me. There's better ways to do a lot of what we do, but there's almost this hesitancy to do it is where it's starting to kind of get a little bit tough. Because I think what people don't realize is also we just can't keep doing these same things over and over again. We're not winning this war. I don't see organizations being fundamentally better. I see more CISOs burning out. I see more organizations getting hit and having problems getting their programs together. And it's this mentality to, like, security professionals also have to reframe the way we look at this too, that we're not in the business of, stopping the business. We're like brakes on the car. And people are like, what are you talking about, Doug? Brakes stop cars. No, brakes allow high performance vehicles to travel at the safest possible speeds at the best performance. It's a balance. And that's where we need to find ourselves in reframing this. And this is where I'm also trying to get a lot of people to step outside of their comfort zone and speak at non-InfoSec conferences about information security or cybersecurity or resiliency. We tend not to do that. And when I ask people, like, do you ever go to like a CFO conference and talk about this? Well, no, why would I? It's like, because they would love to hear from us. You got to get out of our echo chamber, these conferences, these big ones. They're not doing what we need them to do. And one of the big problems that I've had too, that I'm hoping we can change, is the lack of diversity. And I've talked about this at prior Wild West Hacking Fest conferences. And I don't believe we have a talent shortage. I think that's BS. There's plenty of people that are out there. We have what I've discovered with some of the stuff that I've looked at is a ton of hiring affinities, meaning we tend to look like people that look like this, and that's a problem, and the way that we hire and procure and get talent into this industry tends to alienate a lot of people. And then we're so focused on tech skills that there are really good non-technical people that can add value. One of my best pen testers actually came as an audio engineer. He got some really cool stories, actually, way better than the pen testing stories, but celebrities he's worked with, albums he's mixed. And at a point you want to make a career change, his story is really good. And now he's getting pretty high up there, one of the big four banks as running red teams, but that's not where he started. And that's not why I hired him. I hired him for his communication skills, his critical thinking skills. And I knew what he was doing, and I knew where he was unhappy and where he wanted to apply himself. And we just were making plans today. We're going to go see each other in New York City. Somebody that I consider a close friend. So I don't think we have problems with a skill shortage. I think we have a problem with the way that we hire people. And one of the things I noticed too recently is I was sitting down with some SOC people, and I get to see like 50 or 60 a year. And I was like, wait a minute. So everybody's doing this differently. They're like on our teams. And then I go to a different company. So you have, let's say, 10 different companies, 5 different SOC analysts, 5 of them doing it 5 different ways. We have this lack of consistency in the way that we do things that also drives up this idea of a skill shortage that doesn't necessarily be there. And so this is becoming more what I see as a process problem, not a technical problem. We need to teach people how to think through these processes better and more consistent, or we're going to have a lot of inconsistencies in the way that we try to put out these fires. And it's, we talk about a shortage of people, but there's no shortage of tools. Alyssa threw that slide up on the screen today, so I couldn't use it because I would have felt like I was copying her. But you see all these tools, and on the average that I see is about 50 to 70 different security tools in every enterprise environment have implemented. They don't orchestrate, they don't work together, and then we're wondering, well, we don't have enough people. Bullshit. That's an architecture problem, and if we're engineers and hackers, we can do better. Complexity increases cost and also increases risk. So the less that we can do with more people is where we need to be focusing. So I think if we diversify more in our hiring, be more open to who we're hiring, and stop making everything so goddamn complicated in every environment, we'll start getting some traction on this. Because people are burning out. And look, I love cyber, and I've really made it a hobby for a lot of what I did, but it can't be 24 hours a day anymore, just for me and other things. Like I said, the last year has been pretty tough for me, and it made me really reflective of another neighbor. Guy's 47 years old. He's 2 months older than me. They're 3 months older than me. Just died of a heart attack, leaving 2 kids behind. I'm like, God damn, what am I doing? Like, my blood pressure's high. Like, there's health concerns I have, both mental and physical. I'm like, what am I going to really be somebody that works themselves to death? Is that the choice I'm making? No, I got to step back from this. And so we're seeing more and more people, burn out. And so we try to grow out of our teenage years of where we kind of fit in the organization. I really want to see people be more focused on mental health and what they're doing on self-care, and not dedicating themselves to die for the companies they work for, because it's just not the path that I want to see people taking. And I want people to be more open to other things that's out there. Because, there's a saying, you can't control everything. Things you can only control are how you choose to respond to a situation. And I think that's a way for people to really kind of approach an opportunity of growth and reduce the risk of burnout. And ways that we can better integrate with inside the businesses and decide to stop saying it's us versus them, really try to integrate more with the business side of things. And so I kind of came up with this term jokingly, I think on the fly one time, but it's almost like the CISO mullet. It's like business in the front, hacker in the back. But we need to be more integrated in how we talk to the business and afford ourselves more luxury for that downtime by talking about things in terms that they understand. So it's not about us versus them. It's not about forcing down technical risk. And again, Alyssa's got to steal my thunder on this earlier. Joking with her, there's a lot of what she said that I've been trying to say is that it's not that they don't get it. We're not communicating right. And we need to find and frame our things in better ways. And if you look at, again, I get these folks are like, well, we have to show, we're working all this time on the security dashboard. I was like, what is it? Like, mean time to detect, mean time to respond. I was like, what makes you think a CFO understands any of that? They're used to looking at financial statements. This does not resonate with them. Speak in their language. Start looking at hack the way they think. Recon your targets, understand how they think and process data, present data that's meaningful to them. You're going to have less friction. You're going to get much further and hopefully get more downtime. Because right now it's just like we run around saying the sky's falling. They're like, okay, I trust you. So go, like run around. I don't care. And this is where we're seeing this 18-month to 24-month burnout cycle of CISOs, where 70% of them never take off. That's insane. That's a choice we're making. We're choosing to respond that way. We don't have to do that. So we need to grow up with that. So I'm hoping stuff like Alyssa and I are saying are resonating. And look, again, I don't want this to be like such a Doug. It really should be Dougie Downer, but geez, Doug, thanks for ending the day. Now I'm going to crawl to the bar and just drink. No, please don't do it. Again, I don't mean this all to be negative. I'm just saying there's opportunity for change because I love this industry. I love what it's given me. I've been so incredibly lucky to get this point in my life to even have this moment where I can even kind of reevaluate and be like, so what are you going to do next? What are you going to do? I have no clue. I resigned from Splunk and they were gracious enough to do it with no plans. And people are like, well, where are you going? I'm like, I don't know. I'm taking off 2 months. And I encourage everybody to take these like little mini breaks when you can, but I'm taking off from November to December. I'm gonna start processing, working on a lot of the grief and loss I've had the last year and give myself the permission and the space to kind of heal through a lot of this. It's been crazy. Both my work and my professional life, it's just been foot on the gas for over 15 years of just trauma and anxiety to the point where, yeah, I thought about it. It's almost like when I do instant response stuff where it doesn't affect me, and there's could be somebody that's a small business owner crying or a CISO or CFO or CEO worried about losing their job. And I'm almost emotionally numb to it after a while. I'm like, that's not healthy. I've just been doing this for so long that I start building in almost defense mechanisms that I don't want to have. So I really want to step back and I'm kind of do this mini retirement and think, okay, well, what does the end look like? And building backwards. That's what I encourage everybody to do is, whether you're picking a time to retire at 65, 75, whatever, just, it doesn't have to be perfect, but start working backwards and thinking about how you're going to get there. What else do you want to do in your life? There were some studies that showed that when people do retire, by the time they get to retire, they're really, really, really unhappy because they don't have necessarily the energy or the life anymore, quite frankly, to do the things they really wanted to do. So by taking small breaks, I think it's a healthy way to kind of explore yourself and open yourself up. So this little sabbatical that I'm going to take is really also to think, what's that exit strategy? I think I got one more run of a company I want to do and some data analytics around data breach stuff that I've been chewing on in the back of my head. That'll probably be it. And then after 3 to 5 years, I want to be out. And start building a way to do that. Whether that's, taking some serious looking at the way that I invest money, stocks, real estate, kind of build some goals for some buffers so I can continue to do this, where I can continue to think and kind of be more healthy. And one of the things, like, what else you might do? I might write a book. I have so many other interests. And one of the things I was thinking about was, and somebody was like, oh my God, you got to do this. I forgot who I was telling last night, but it was, the unique history of spirits and cocktails. Like, I'm really into craft cocktail culture, but I found myself knowing way too much about too many random things. But it's that little hacker mentality of deconstructing everything. But like things like Tennessee whiskey was founded by freed slaves, why gunpowder was used to proof Navy strength gin, and all these things. That'd be a cool bunch of stories. And it'd be so far away from just the technical and the everyday cyber stuff, or the Thursday fire drill until Sunday we figure out a patch shit because some 0-day got out. Just something else that just basically stimulate. It's other things that I want to work on that are not right within the things that I do every day. And I give myself to do that. There might be some other food or other things. I actually trademarked a bunch of names for bitters cocktail line the other year, a couple of years ago that I haven't touched since then. Maybe I'll work on that. And it might be like, what am I going to do when I work back? And there's bigger problems in the world that I want to work on. I think as hackers, we should go after. We're facing a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the climate change issues. There's going to be, without a doubt, this is not just the sky is falling, but there's going to be a water crisis. Water scarcity is going to be a problem in highly developed areas that are close to water. You see it happen with hurricanes. I know it, unfortunately, because I lived through Hurricane Sandy. But we lost all the fresh water for several weeks. You're like, well, how? It's like, well, because all the water got polluted. There was no way to pump it. So things like that are going to be more and more. How can I solve that problem? I was walking through LA the other night, and I just saw the Salvation Army struggling to just give water. So I just DoorDashed like 5 cases of water over. So things like chronic homelessness and people starving. I hate seeing that. It drives me nuts. I want to be able to solve those problems, help people. And most of the day, I'm helping executives make sure that they can go play golf on the weekends. Like I said, I give CISOs a ton of time back on the weekend, but I really want to work on some bigger problems. And that's what I want to do is I want to take all these lessons learned and work on new problems. I want new problems to solve, and I want to make new mistakes. That was the one thing that when I did the podcast that, Chris Roberts, who is in Colorado and probably one of the nicest guys and most giving people in this industry. I think I'm energetic and out there, man. He's great, and I consider him a friend. But he said to me, he's like, we need to start making new mistakes in this industry. And I was like, yeah, that's so true. I didn't think about that, but we do. We make a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. It's time for us to kind of grow up and change who we are. We're hackers. We need to adapt and overcome and become who we need to be. But it's not just being this static entity, this monolith of hacker culture. That doesn't exist. It's a constantly evolving thing. The core roots of it are problem solving, taking things apart, putting it back together, but for the betterment of it. And I want to see people do that and make new mistakes. So with that, I hope to see everybody in the next couple of years work on some of the bigger problems. So stay punk and punch Nazis. Thanks for coming out to my talk. Honestly, I don't know if that leads into any questions, but I'm happy to.
There's some really good feedback from the Discord. People are loving it.
The invisible Discord behind me. I wish forget that's out there.
Someone said they were crying, so it definitely had some impact.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
People asked what your podcast was. His podcast is called Cybersecurity Interviews.
I highly recommend the John Strand one because John's one of the first people that was just like, fuck yeah, I've had some mental health problems. I was like, oh, I didn't expect that. He was just open about it. And we need more people that are at that caliber talking about the serious issues.